Welcome to the Discover Montcalm podcast, where we're going to take a look at the communities, the businesses, the attractions, and the people that make up Montcalm County.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Discover Montcalm podcast. My name is Phil Tower. No, I'm not the host of this podcast. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with the host of this podcast, and that is Duane Weed. Duane, welcome to your podcast.
Well, thank you very much for helping me out here today.
And I am Duane, a product of Montcalm County, so that's part of the reason. You and I have known each other for some time, professionally and personally, and I'm so excited that you've started this podcast. I would like to know, I think it's always important to know what was the inspiration for this project.
Back in 2018, I started this as a documentary, thinking that Discover Montcalm would be a very in-depth look into the county, all avenues, and through 2018 to 2020, started a few episodes, interviews, that type of thing. But I was finding that funding was not the easiest thing to come by. And then we all know what happened in 2020.
We all do it, indeed.
So in 2021, Franz Magnus, who recently passed away this year, from the Montcalm Alliance, was helping me look for funding, and then he passed away. And I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do with Discover Montcalm? And the idea came up with a podcast. I remember making a phone call to you, because I know that you've been doing podcasts for a long time, and you've been in radio for a long time, so I thought if anybody could give me some insight, you might be somebody that would do that, and you did. And you basically said, go, do it. And so I set off and spent the summer of 2022 getting together my episodes so I would have at least 12 of them before I released the first one.
Fantastic. And I'm going to hazard a guess. There are no shortage of stories for the Discover Montcalm podcast.
No, there is not. And the thing that I'm looking at is I want to unturn every stone, anything that goes along with it, because I want to look at businesses, I want to look at people, I want to look at communities and attractions. And that kind of leaves me wide open to a lot of different things.
Indeed. Well, I don't want you to give away all of the episodes, and it's very exciting that you've already got 12 ready to go, and we'll be talking about the releases, but can you give us a hint of some of the subjects, some of the people perhaps, that are going to be profiled in some of these upcoming episodes?
You might know him, Bill Delp from the Greenville area.
Yes.
He also recently passed away. But back in 2011, when I was teaching a 7th-hour class at Greenville High School, we went into the Fighting Falcon Museum and we interviewed Bill. Well, I never really did anything with that. So I was looking at content and I thought, well, okay, I can't get Bill. So Bill Gerlach from Greenville also is part of the Fighting Falcon Museum. I reached out to him and he kind of gave me the beginning and then the ending of, well, what has happened at the museum since 2011? So that's going to be my second episode. And then from there, I've interviewed, people in economic development. I've interviewed people in business, entrepreneurs, businesses that have been around for a long time. I've talked to county commissioners. I've talked to people in government. I'm just trying to, off the top of my head, there's at least 12 to 14.
Well, it's not surprising for either one of us to acknowledge that Montcalm County is a very diverse county. It's also a misunderstood county from those who haven't lived here or worked here or spent any appreciable amount of time here. What has surprised you so far the most in recording each of these 12 episodes?
That I don't know too much about what goes on the East. I've also learned
What happens in Edmore stays in Edmore.
yeah, or what happens at Carson City.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing that I have kind of looked at, and this, it might be an imaginary line, but we're going to use M66 for a border there. It seems like people over in M66 to the east, they shop in different places. Their healthcare is in different places. Over here on the west side, we shop at different places. You know, we tend to go more maybe toward Grand Rapids, where they might go toward Lansing or Mount Pleasant or even Ionia. So as I was diving into this, that was the one thing that came, you know, pretty much apparent to me, is that there's this imaginary line that people's habits, where they go, what they do, where they eat, changes because of location, and that's pretty much the same with myself.
It's interesting, you pointed out the differences between west of M66, east of M66, that, if you will, figurative dividing line, but it also points out the fact that the county, from a drivable standpoint, it's a very large county. And to get from one extreme corner, the extreme, let's say, for instance, northwest corner, to the extreme southeast corner, you're covering quite a few miles.
About an hour.
And I think that surprises people by how much there is in the county, how many unique towns to discover, hence the name Discover Montcalm. Any ideas for podcast episodes that you're cooking up right now, or at least kicking around?
Well, before I release this on the 16th, on the 15th, I've got a lady coming in who is either 99 or 100. And that just kind of fell into place. She wrote a book, and she was born in Truphant, and she grew up in Howard City, and she's very, mine's still intact, and I'm very anxious to learn more about things almost a century ago. You can't interview too many people that way. But, you know, the world's my oyster, so to speak. You know, there's just so much out there. There's a lot of golden nuggets. There's some entrepreneurs out there that are doing some really cool things. There's some made in Montcalm County businesses that have done very well and are going all over the U.S. I don't know, I'm hoping to get into them, and, you know, just instead of made in Michigan, you know, made in Montcalm County. So that to me is pretty cool.
By the way, we're speaking with Duane Weed, host of the Discover Montcalm podcast. I'm Phil Tower. I'm the introductory host for this series of podcasts, which you will be able to get a new episode every Tuesday. We'll talk about that, and I'll be asking you about that, Duane. You know, it's interesting when most of us who have lived in Montcalm County, I was born and raised in Greenville. Stanton is the county seat, yet they're two distinct communities. There's a lot of history in each of those communities, and they still have a very rich and important belonging in Montcalm County, if you will, probably two of the most visible areas in the county, and not to in any way disparage our friends in Carson City or Edmore. But let's talk about those two cities. Do you plan to do a special episode or series of episodes on the history of Stanton, the history of Greenville, because they're certainly rich and unique in their own right?
I hope over time I can hit every community and do exactly that.
Right.
You know, I want to do the history, but I also want to, you know, like yesterday, today, and the future. You know, what's the future looking like in all of these areas? So yes, I definitely want to do that, because I think the more we know about our county, the more we can really appreciate what we have.
Very well said. And we've got a lot of great, and I really can't pass this by without acknowledging, we've got some really great tiny towns, villages, dots on the map in Montcalm County. We've got Coral, we've got Fenwick, Truphant. North of Truphant, you have Langston, and I could go on, and that's the delight about Montcalm County. I guess what I want to ask at this point is, why would someone want to discover Montcalm County? And I'll ask this from your perspective versus, and at the same time, answer it from the perspective of the listener to this podcast, maybe someone who's never been here.
Montcalm County is rural. We don't have any major attractions that bring people here. We're very much agriculture, but there's a lot of lakes, there's a lot of wildlife, open fields, unobtrusive views of nature. And you can look out over fields and just see the beauty. You can see the sunrise, you can see it set without anything blocking the way. And I think people come up here, they've got cabins on lakes because of its quiet, because of its beauty. And it's just small town. You mentioned all the little dots. They're great places to live and to visit, but yet we can jump half hour, 45 minutes in either direction and hit a more bigger metropolitan area. I like to live where I'm at, visit the other places, and run back home and live where I'm at. And that's kind of where I'm looking at things. It's just a good place to visit. There's a lot of great eateries. There's some great attractions here, a lot of festivals. It's small town America, and I think that's the part that I like the best.
You've just heard from Duane Weed, the host of the Discover Montcalm podcast. I'm your host for the first episode, Phil Tower. This podcast wouldn't happen without these great sponsors.
We hope you're enjoying our podcast, and we'll be back after we thank our sponsors. West Michigan Technology and Design Solutions, your IT and web hosting experts. westmichiganhelpdesk.com. And DW Video, your source for video production, websites, and your local videotape, slides, and 8mm film transfer specialist. DWVideo.com. Now, back to our interview.
Welcome back. This is the Discover Montcalm podcast, and we're grateful of our sponsors, and thank you for allowing us to acknowledge them. The sponsors are important, Duane, because a lot of people, they don't understand the word podcast, what it means. Is it like Netflix or something I have to subscribe to and pay for? But there's some good news for the majority of people who listen to podcasts. So please elaborate.
Well, the good news is the feed is free. You can use your favorite podcast app. You can go to discovermontcalmpodcast.com. Right on the home page, you can grab the link there, put it in your favorite. It's an RSS feed, goes right to you. We're on Apple, we're on Google, and as we grow, we'll be on more. But we're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Discover Montcalm Podcast. Just look for those. And I like the fact that the podcasts are free, and our sponsors are important because right now there's only two sponsors. There's DW Video, my company, and there's West Michigan Technology and Design Solutions, JR down in Byron Center, is hosting the sites for me. And right now the two of us have kind of collaborated, put everything out there so that we can bring it to people. And you got to start somewhere.
Indeed. And we might as well shout out to our future sponsors. I'm sure you would welcome someone listening to this podcast who would love to help pay some of the freight, if you will. They may even have some ideas for some future episodes. How do they get a hold of you, first of all, if they would like to be one of the Discover Montcalm podcast sponsors?
My phone, 231-250-9624. You can call me, text me. You can reach out to the discovermontcalmpodcast.com. My contact information is there as well. And yes, I'm open for ideas. The beauty of this whole thing, in my mind, is that it is going to be a moving target. I made sure that I had 12 episodes in the can before I started because I didn't want to play catch up. I wanted to make sure that I had enough. Now, what order they go in, I'm going to be working on that, and I'm already getting people calling to be on the show, and I'll just kind of fit them in, which means I should always stay ahead of the curve as far as putting things out there. And I'm open to ideas because I want the east side of the county to know what the west side of the county is doing. And maybe there's some businesses here that didn't know about a business over there that could expand their business just by knowing somebody else. So I'm trying to make connections, and I'm having fun with it.
That's a great point. Many who live in the eastern part of the county may not know what's happening on the western part of the county. If someone listening to this or any of the episodes has an idea for someone they think would make a great guest, or maybe they would like to submit themselves as a guest because they have a connection to something unique in the history of Montcalm County, same way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can call me. My email is Duane, D-U-A-N-E, at dwvideo.com. So they can reach out. And I would like to say that for the guest coming on the show, at least at this point, you know, the businesses, the attractions and that kind of thing, there's a small fee. It's a lot less if they come to my studio in Howard City. But I think it's more important that I go out to them at their location, do a walking tour, get into there. And you know, we're trying to keep the cost very low. You can find that out on my website. You can call me. I'm just trying to make it affordable so that we can tell your story. And for those that don't have a sponsorship, you know, let's say there's a nonprofit or there's just a local historian, what I'm asking that person or organization to do is, if they don't have the funds, is there somebody there that would like to sponsor just their episode? You know, whether I'm going to them or whether they're coming to the my studio in Howard City, because we can just feature them for that one episode as being a sponsor. So there's ways of making it work. We just have to turn it over and look.
Any final thoughts for the listeners? We should probably talk about when the podcast is coming out.
Every Tuesday at noon, I'm going to release these. And what would be very great in my mind, you can tell if we're growing if I move it to a second, you know, twice a week. But right now, it's every Tuesday at noon, and we try to make it happen.
And the irony about this is, this could be the first and only Montcalm County focused podcast, but who knows what Duane will uncover during his discovering of Montcalm County. You may discover some other podcasters who could end up being on this podcast.
I would love it.
Which would be a fun and unique twist on the irony of podcasts.
Share the golden nuggets that we have within our county. That's very important to me.
Yeah, and somewhere out there, somewhere, Duane, is Montcalm County's most mysterious and unique person. Kind of like that beer campaign from years ago. But in a serious sense, who knows who you might uncover who has an amazing story to tell, or maybe has been keeping an amazing story for years that only their family knew. We're certainly looking forward to it, and I've been honored to be able to sit in his chair for the rest of the episodes of the Discover Montcalm podcast. Even if you don't know where to find a podcast, start on the webpage, discovermontcalmpodcast.com, and you'll get everything you need to know from there, including how to contact Duane so you can be on a future episode. And thank you for listening. This has been the inaugural first episode of the Discover Montcalm podcast for Duane Weed and Discover Montcalm. I'm Phil Tower. Thank you for listening.
And on one final note, every episode ends with, remember to buy and shop locally.
You just did it.
Connect and subscribe to Discover Montcalm Podcast at discovermontcalmpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Discover Montcalm Podcast. To be featured in an upcoming show, contact Duane at 231-250-9624. Remember to subscribe at discovermontcalmpodcast.com.